She was the daughter of the most powerful man in the county, a woman who could have had any wealthy suitor she desired. Yet her heart betrayed every expectation, beating for someone polite society would never approve of. Can you imagine the burden of carrying a last name that opens every door, but also locks your heart inside a gilded cage where true love is denied entry? This story actually happened in the countryside of Georgia in May of 1889, just months before the shifting tides of the new industrial age would change the South forever. Before we continue with this tale, make sure to hit that subscribe button and smash the like button down below, because what this young woman had the courage to do challenged not only her father, but an entire society built on pride and appearances. Her heart chose a path that could destroy everything, but it was the only path that could save her soul. And let me know in the comments which city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The afternoon of May 12th, 1889, settled warm and golden over Oak Creek Plantation, a property that sprawled over 2,000 acres in the rolling hills of the Deep South. The late afternoon sun painted the distant Blue Ridge Mountains in shades of orange and pink, while the scent of damp earth from the recent spring rains rose from the ground, mingling with the sweet aroma of blooming magnolias and the crops covering the slopes as far as the eye could see. On the immense veranda of the main house, an imposing two-story structure with white columns and slate tiles brought all the way from Savannah, Evelyn Montgomery held a cup of French porcelain. Watching the movement of the workers returning from the fields, she was 22 years old, with fair skin that rarely saw the direct sun, dark brown hair swept up in an elaborate chignon with loose tendrils framing a face of delicate features, and honey-colored eyes that held an intelligence and restless curiosity. She wore a moss-green taffeta gown with puffed sleeves and a cinched waist, far too expensive for a common afternoon. But Colonel Augustus Montgomery insisted his only daughter maintain appearances even within the privacy of their home. One never knew when an important guest might arrive. Evelyn had returned home only 3 weeks ago, after 5 years at St. Catherine's Academy for Young Ladies in Charleston. Her mother, Clarissa, had passed away when Evelyn was 12, a victim of the typhoid fever that swept through the region, claiming dozens of lives during that cruel winter of 1879. The girl was sent to study with the nuns shortly after, a decision the colonel justified by claiming he wanted a refined education for his daughter, though Evelyn always knew there was another reason. He could not bear to look at her without seeing the face of his dead wife. At the academy, she learned French, piano, embroidery, history, literature, and all the skills that transformed young ladies into suitable wives for men of means. She read Balzac and Victor Hugo, hidden under her covers after the nuns had extinguished the lamps. She played Chopin with a depth of feeling that made the older sisters discreetly wipe away tears. She wrote weekly letters to her father, which he rarely answered, yet she continued sending them with detailed accounts of her life, as if maintaining the connection could one day bring back the affection he had locked away in the trunk at the foot of his bed, along with her mother's clothes. Now she was back, and the house seemed smaller than she held in her memory, yet simultaneously more oppressive. The colonel had aged, his hair completely white at 53, his back still ramrod straight from his military days, a thick, well-groomed mustache, and blue eyes cold as ice that rarely betrayed emotion. He had received her with a formal kiss on the forehead and a direct declaration of intentions. It was time to marry. Evelyn sipped the rest of her coffee, now cold, as the memory of their conversation 10 days ago returned with crystal clarity. Her father had summoned her to his study, a room lined with dark mahogany, smelling of cigars and old leather bindings, where he managed business interests that extended across 3 counties. She had entered with her heart clenched in anxiety, not knowing what to expect. The colonel dispensed with pleasantries. "Evelyn, "You are 22 years old and possess a first-rate education," he said without lifting his eyes from the papers on his desk. "I spent a fortune on your schooling so that you would become a wife worthy of an important man. The time has come to fulfill your role. I am hosting a grand ball here at the plantation on your birthday, June 8th. I have invited the finest families in the region. You will meet the suitors and choose one by the end of the summer." She had tried to argue that she would like some time to readjust to life on the plantation, to reacquaint herself with the house, to simply breathe after years away. But the colonel cut her words short with an impatient wave of his hand. "There is no time to lose," he declared, with a voice that brooked no argument. "You are no longer a child. You have obligations. Our name, our position, demands proper alliances." And then he added something that made her stomach turn. "I already have 3 candidates in mind, all sons of prosperous landowners. Any one of them would be a sensible choice." Evelyn had clasped her hands in her lap, feeling her nails dig into her palms, even through the fabric of her gloves. Sensible. The word echoed like a prison sentence. He hadn't asked if she wanted to marry. He hadn't asked if she had dreams of her own. He hadn't asked anything. He had merely informed her of the decision, as one determines what color to paint a wall. She had tried, one last time, to appeal to any shred of paternal affection that might still exist. "Father, I would like to have some choice in this," she said, her voice trying to remain steady but trembling at the edges. "I would like to meet someone for whom I might hold true feelings." The colonel finally raised his eyes, and what she saw there froze any hope. "True feelings," he repeated with thinly veiled contempt, "are a luxury for people without responsibilities. You are a Montgomery. Your marriage is not about what you feel. It is about what you owe to this family, to the name you carry, to the future you must secure." Then he dismissed her with a wave of his hand, returning to his papers as if she had already left the room. Evelyn set the empty cup on the veranda railing, the porcelain clinking against the stone. 3 weeks, living under the same roof as her father, and they had exchanged fewer words than she swapped with Mrs. Higgins, the housekeeper who had raised her more than any substitute mother could. Loneliness weighed like a stone in her chest. She had returned home dreaming of a reunion, of a possibility of reconnection, perhaps even some form of mutual forgiveness for the lost time. But she found only an elegant stranger who saw her as a chess piece. The sound of hooves on the dirt road caught her attention. A rider approached at a trot, his silhouette cut against the setting sun. Evelyn recognized Silas, the plantation foreman, the colonel's trusted man for over 20 years. He dismounted in the courtyard and handed the reins to one of the stable boys, then climbed the veranda steps, removing his leather hat. "Good evening, Miss Evelyn," he greeted with genuine respect. "Is your father in?" "He's been in the study since lunch," she replied. "Is there a problem?" Silas hesitated, twisting the brim of his hat in his calloused hands. "Nothing for you to worry about, miss," he said diplomatically. "I just need to speak with the colonel about a shipment that hasn't arrived." Evelyn nodded, and the foreman entered the house. She turned back to look at the landscape, but anxiety grew inside her like a caged beast. 22 years of life, and the biggest decision she was allowed to make was which of 3 rich strangers she would choose to marry. 3 men she didn't even know yet, but who were already being evaluated like prize cattle at an auction. Revolt boiled up, but soon cooled into bitter resignation. What could she do? It was 1889. She was a single woman from a traditional family. She had no profession, no money of her own, nowhere to go. The world beyond this plantation was even more closed to someone like her. At least here she had a roof, food, clothes. At least here she had some form of security, even if it was the security of a gilded cage. But her soul screamed for something more. For the nights at the academy when she read forbidden novels about courageous heroines who defied convention. for the afternoons playing piano when the music took her to places where feelings mattered more than surnames. For a version of the future where she could choose, could feel, could truly live, instead of merely existing as a pretty ornament in some man's life. Dinner that night was as silent as ever. Evelyn and the Colonel sat at opposite ends of the long rosewood table, illuminated by silver candelabras, served by Mrs. Higgins and two younger girls from the kitchen. They ate roast chicken with okra and grits, followed by pumpkin pie for dessert, everything prepared with a care that Evelyn knew was a gesture of affection from the cook. The Colonel commented briefly on a problem with a cotton supplier, but went into no detail. Evelyn mentioned she had finished reading a book she brought from school. He nodded distractedly. The conversation died before it truly began. When they rose from the table, the Colonel announced he would leave early the next morning to settle business in the town of Riverton, about 10 miles away. He would return only in the late afternoon. Evelyn nodded, relieved by the prospect of a whole day without his oppressive presence. She went up to her room, a spacious chamber on the second floor with windows overlooking the back of the property, where the orchards lay and, beyond them, the dense woods covering the hills. She undressed with the help of Betsy, a young maid of 15 who had been assigned to assist her. She put on a white linen nightgown and sat at the vanity while the girl undid her elaborate chignon, releasing hair that fell to her waist. Betsy brushed with care, and Evelyn closed her eyes, allowing herself to relax for the first time that day. The girl hummed a low tune Evelyn recognized from childhood, a melody Mrs. Higgins used to sing when she was little and had nightmares after her mother's death. "Betsy," Evelyn asked suddenly, "do you want to marry someday?" The girl paused the brush for a second, surprised by the question. "Yes, ma'am, I do," she replied shyly. "There's a boy who fancies me. He works over at Mr. Joseph Miller's farm, the neighbor." "And do you fancy him?" Evelyn insisted. "I like him very much, miss," confirmed Betsy, and there was genuine warmth in her voice. "He's hard-working, honest. We've known each other since we were children." Evelyn opened her eyes and looked at the girl's reflection in the mirror. "And does your father allow it?" Betsy smiled. "My daddy knows his family, miss. He gave his blessing. We're going to marry after the harvest." There was such pure happiness in that smile that Evelyn felt envy tighten her chest like a closed fist. A 15-year-old maid had more freedom to choose her own future than she, the Colonel's daughter, educated in the finest schools. "That's wonderful, Betsy," she said with sincerity. "I hope you'll be very happy." The girl finished brushing her hair, helped Evelyn into bed, extinguished the lamps leaving only one lit on the bedside table, and left, closing the door carefully. Evelyn lay awake for a long time, watching the shadows the flame cast on the ceiling. The future stretched out before her like a dark road without curves, too straight and too predictable. Marriage to a man chosen by her father. Children she would raise to repeat the same cycle, growing old in this same house, or another equally large and equally empty, a whole life measured by obligations and appearances, never by desires or dreams. She fell asleep with a bitter taste in her mouth and woke up with the sun already high, shining through the lace curtains. She had overslept, the emotional exhaustion of the last few weeks finally taking its toll. She got up, washed her face in the porcelain basin, and put on a simpler light blue cotton dress, suitable for staying at home. She went downstairs and had breakfast alone, the Colonel having departed before dawn as announced. Fresh, warm biscuits, coffee with milk, blackberry jam. Mrs. Higgins appeared at the kitchen door, a robust woman in her 50s, graying hair tied in a thick braid, pristine white apron. "Did you sleep well, my child?" she asked, with a maternal affection the Colonel never showed. "I did, Mrs. Higgins," lied Evelyn. "Do you need help with anything today?" The cook smiled. "Nonsense, child. You're the mistress. You don't need to work. But if you want to keep this old woman company in the kitchen, you're always welcome." Evelyn spent the morning there, chatting with Mrs. Higgins, while the woman prepared dough for cornbread and seasoned meat for lunch. She heard stories from the time her mother was alive, when the house had laughter and music and real life. The cook spoke with such deep longing that Evelyn felt her own chest ache. After lunch, the restlessness returned. The house seemed too small. The walls were closing in. Evelyn went upstairs, changed her delicate slippers for sturdier leather boots, grabbed a wide-brimmed straw hat, and went out through the back. "I'm going for a walk," she told Mrs. Higgins. "Don't go far, my child," the cook advised with concern. "Your father doesn't like you walking alone." "I'll stay by the orchards," promised Evelyn. But when she reached the orange and lemon groves, the woods beyond called like a siren. It had been years since she explored those lands. As a child, before her mother died, she used to play there with the workers' children. She knew every trail, every large oak, every stone in the creek that cut the boundary between Oak Creek Plantation and the neighboring property. She entered the cool shade of the trees, breathing deep the scent of damp earth and leaves. The silence was different here, alive with the sounds of birds and wind in the canopy. She walked without hurry, letting her hands brush against the trunks of hickory and pine. The trail was still there, somewhat overgrown but recognizable. She reached the creek after 20 minutes of walking. The water ran clear over smooth stones, singing a song that soothed something wounded inside her. There was a large, flat rock on the bank where she used to sit as a child. It was still there, covered in moss, but solid. Evelyn looked around, confirmed she was completely alone, and did something unthinkable. She took off her boots and stockings, pinned up the hem of her dress to her knees, and stepped into the water. The sharp cold tore a laugh from her, a sound that surprised even herself. How long had it been since she truly laughed? The icy water rose to her shins, stones smooth under her bare feet. She stood there, feeling the current pulled gently, feeling the sun filtered through the leaves warm her shoulders, feeling alive for the first time in weeks. That was when she heard the noise. Horse hooves, wagon wheels, coming down the trail on the other side of the creek. Evelyn froze, instant panic flooding her veins. If anyone saw her like this, barefoot, with her dress pinned up showing her legs, it would be a scandal the colonel would never forgive. She scrambled out of the water in a hurry, slipped on a slime-covered rock, tried to balance herself and failed. She fell seated onto the muddy bank, water soaking her entire dress, her hat flying off and landing in the middle of the stream. The wagon appeared around the bend of the trail at exactly that moment. It was a simple farm wagon, pulled by 2 bay horses, loaded with sacks of what looked like corn and farm tools. And driving it was a man Evelyn had never seen before. He was around 30 years old, wearing simple but clean workman's clothes, a cream cotton shirt with sleeves rolled up, revealing tanned forearms, dark denim trousers, a leather hat protecting him from the sun. He was tall, with the broad shoulders of someone who works with their hands, but there was something in his upright posture and the way he held the reins that suggested an education that went beyond manual labor. When he saw Evelyn fallen in the mud, he pulled the reins, bringing the horses to a halt, his expression changing immediately to genuine concern. "Are you all right, ma'am?" he asked, jumping from the wagon with agility and crossing the creek in 3 long strides. Evelyn wanted to die of shame right there. She was covered in mud, her loose hair stuck to her face, her soaked dress clinging to her body. She tried to stand up, and her hand slipped again. The man extended his hand in an automatic gesture of help, then hesitated, as if remembering it wasn't appropriate to touch an unknown lady. But Evelyn was so desperate to get out of that situation that she grabbed the offered hand. He pulled her up with controlled strength, holding firm until she was standing and stable. Then he let go immediately, stepping back a respectful distance. "Are you hurt?" he asked, examining her with a gaze that was clinical, not invasive. "No, just wet and muddy," Evelyn admitted, and to her own astonishment she laughed at the absurdity of the situation. "I slipped trying to get out of the water quickly when I heard your wagon." The man narrowed his eyes, looking around, then back at her, and something that might be amusement tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Were you hiding from me?" "I was avoiding an embarrassing situation," corrected Evelyn, though the heat in her cheeks betrayed her. "Which clearly failed spectacularly," he laughed, a low, genuine sound that echoed comfortably in the silence of the woods. "Well, if it's any consolation, I promised to completely forget I saw the daughter of an important family playing barefoot in the creek like a country child." Evelyn froze. "How do you know who I am?" His expression became more serious, more careful. "I live on the neighboring farm," he explained. "My father is Joseph Miller. He runs the property bordering your father's, Colonel Montgomery. I know who you are because the whole county is talking about his daughter returning from the academy." A different heat rose up Evelyn's neck, a mixture of embarrassment and something harder to name. "And you are?" She left the question hanging. "Robert," he replied, taking off his hat in a gesture of formal introduction that contrasted with their wet and muddy state. "Robert Miller. I helped my father tend the land." There was education in the way he spoke, clear diction of someone who had studied, a vocabulary that went beyond a common laborer. Evelyn frowned, curiosity overcoming embarrassment. "You've been educated?" Robert hesitated, as if unsure whether to share. "I studied at the normal school in Atlanta," he finally admitted. "I graduated as a teacher 4 years ago." "A teacher?" repeated Evelyn, genuine surprise in her voice. "Then why are you here driving a farm wagon?" His expression closed a little, old pain passing quickly through his dark eyes. "My mother died when my youngest brother was born," he explained with a controlled voice. "My father was left alone with 4 children, me being the eldest. The farm doesn't yield enough to hire extra help, so I came back." "You abandoned your profession to care for your family," said Evelyn slowly, "and it wasn't a question." "I didn't abandon it," corrected Robert. "I just postponed it. One day I will teach again, but for now, my place is here." There was such deep dignity in that answer that something in Evelyn's chest shifted, opening a space she didn't even know was closed. Here was a man who had chosen sacrifice out of familial love, who had placed the needs of others above his own ambition. So different from the men she knew, who measured value in acres and bales of cotton. "Your hat?" said Robert suddenly, pointing to the creek where the straw hat floated caught between stones. He waded into the water without hesitation, retrieved the hat, shook it off, and brought it back to her. Evelyn accepted it, fingers brushing against his for a brief second that seemed to last longer than it should have. "Thank you," she murmured. Robert nodded, put his own hat back on, and looked in the direction of the big house visible in the distance through the trees. "I should walk you back," he said. "It's getting late, and it's not safe to walk alone in the woods." Evelyn wanted to protest that she knew these lands better than anyone, but the truth was that his company, strangely, didn't feel invasive. It felt comfortable. "Thank you," she accepted. Robert tied the horses to a tree, ensuring the wagon was secure, and returned to walk beside her. He kept a respectful distance but pointed out low branches in the path, offering a hand when the trail became too steep. They talked during the walk back. He asked about the academy, and she found herself telling him about the strict nuns, about the French lessons she loved, about the music that saved her from monotony. He listened with genuine attention, asking intelligent questions that showed real interest. When she asked about Atlanta, he described the city with the affection of someone who had loved his time there. He spoke about the public library where he spent hours, about professors who shaped his thinking, about his dream of one day opening a school for poor children in the region who never had a chance to learn to read. They reached the edge of the orchard too quickly. Evelyn stopped, looking at the big house in the distance, then back at Robert. The afternoon had turned into early evening, the sky painted purple and rose. "Thank you for walking me," she said, and it meant more than just the walk. Robert inclined his head. "It was a pleasure meeting you, Miss Evelyn." And he seemed sincere. He turned to leave, but she heard her own voice calling out before she could censor herself. "Mr. Miller." He stopped, looked back. "Do you still read?" asked Evelyn, not knowing why she was asking. "I do," he confirmed. "Whenever I can find the time. Have you read anything interesting lately?" His eyes shone with something that might be pleasant surprise. "I finished The Portrait of a Lady last week. Henry James. Do you know it?" "I do," replied Evelyn, her pulse quickening inexplicably. "I read it last year. What did you think?" Robert hesitated, as if gauging whether to share his true opinion. "I thought it was brilliant and tragic," he finally said. "The way it shows that we never truly know another person completely, that even love can be built on false assumptions. It is devastating." Evelyn felt the air catch in her throat. It was exactly what she had felt reading it, but she had never managed to put it into words. And here was a man who not only read the same book, but understood it in the same profound way. "It is devastating indeed," she agreed with a softer voice, "but also real." They stood there for a moment too long to be casual, looking at each other while something intangible but undeniable formed in the space between them. Robert broke eye contact first. "Good evening, Miss Evelyn," he said, and there was a new caution in his voice, as if he too had felt whatever that was. "Good evening, Mr. Miller," she replied. He left, walking back down the trail, and Evelyn stood watching until he disappeared among the trees. Only then did she realize she was smiling, and that something in her chest was warmed in a way she didn't remember feeling before. She entered the house through the back, went straight up to her room before anyone saw her, soaked and covered in mud. She changed clothes quickly, hid the ruined dress at the bottom of the wardrobe, and washed her face and feet in the basin. But while she got ready for dinner, her mind kept returning to the meeting at the creek. To the way Robert had looked at her, not as a colonel's daughter, but as a person, to the conversation that flowed as naturally as the stream water, to the way he spoke about family, about sacrifice, about dreams postponed but not abandoned. The colonel returned late that night, went straight to his study without seeking her out. Evelyn dined alone, then went to the small library of the house, a room no one else used. She searched the shelves until she found an old volume of Walt Whitman's poetry her mother used to read. She sat in the worn leather armchair and opened the book to a random page. The poem was about freedom, about broken chains, about a soul refusing to be imprisoned. And as she read, Evelyn knew with a certainty that frightened and liberated her at the same time. Something had changed that afternoon. A door she didn't even know was locked had opened, and through it came a light, showing that there were other ways to live, other kinds of men, other possibilities for a future. She didn't know what to do with this. She didn't know if anything would come of that chance meeting. She didn't know if she would see Robert Miller again, but for the first time since she returned home, the future didn't seem just a straight and predictable road. There was a curve ahead, hidden still, but promising that the journey might not be as empty as she feared. And that tiny possibility, fragile as a candle flame, was enough to make her heart beat differently when she finally turned out the lights and went to sleep. The following days dragged with torturous slowness, each hour marked by the pendulum clock in the living room counting time. Evelyn didn't know if she wanted to pass quickly or slowly. Quickly, because the restlessness corroded her from the inside. Slowly, because every passing day brought her closer to the birthday ball and the decisions the colonel expected her to make. She tried to occupy her time with reading, piano, embroidery she pretended to do while her mind wandered to places it shouldn't, but always, inevitably, her thoughts returned to the meeting at the creek. To the way Robert Miller had helped her without judgment, how he conversed with her as if she were a real person and not a porcelain doll on a pedestal. To the way his eyes shone when they spoke of literature, the recognition of a kindred soul finding another. Evelyn told herself it was foolishness. It was a chance encounter, a geographical accident that would never repeat itself. Let him live his life on the neighboring farm. She would live hers here, and the world would keep turning without their paths crossing again. But the following Thursday, 6 days after the fall in the creek, Mrs. Higgins announced during breakfast that she needed to go to town to fetch supplies only found there: coarse salt, kerosene for the lamps, special sewing threads the seamstress had requested. The colonel was busy with paperwork in the study and dismissed Silas's request to accompany the cook with an impatient gesture, saying he needed the foreman there to fix a broken fence in the north pasture. Evelyn, sitting at the table, feigning interest in the biscuit with butter cooling on her plate, heard everything and made an impulsive decision that surprised her. "I'll accompany Mrs. Higgins," she offered before she could censor herself. The colonel raised his eyes from the newspaper he was reading while drinking coffee. "You?" he repeated with an arched eyebrow. "Yes," confirmed Evelyn, forcing her voice to sound casual. "I haven't left the plantation in weeks. I would like to see the town again, see the changes." Her father studied her for a long moment, and Evelyn held her breath, expecting a refusal. But he merely shrugged with indifference. "As you wish," he said, returning to the newspaper. "But do not tarry. And maintain proper composure. You represent our name." "Yes, father," she promised, her heart beating far too fast. 2 hours later, she was sitting beside Mrs. Higgins in the buggy, pulled by a gentle mare, leaving the plantation behind. The dirt road wound through a landscape blending pastures, cotton fields, and stretches of preserved woods. The day was bright, the sky an intense blue, speckled with white clouds that looked like cotton balls, the breeze carrying the scent of grass and sun-warmed earth. The town of Riverton was about 10 miles away, a cluster of simple buildings arranged around a central square where the main church stood. It had a general store, a blacksmith, a seamstress, a tavern, a small pharmacy, and little else. Most of the population lived scattered on the surrounding farms, coming to town only for Sunday service or specific needs. They arrived near noon, when the sun fell vertical and merciless, making the dust of the main street shine golden. Mrs. Higgins tied the mare in front of Mr. Tobias's general store, an establishment that sold everything from fabrics to tools, food to medicine. Evelyn stepped down from the buggy, adjusted her straw hat, and followed the cook inside. The interior was cool and dark, compared to the sun outside, smelling of spices, roasted coffee, and soap. Mr. Tobias, a short, round man in his 60s, greeted Mrs. Higgins with enthusiasm, and Evelyn with exaggerated reverence that made her feel uncomfortable. While the cook discussed the shopping list with the merchant, Evelyn wandered along the shelves observing the displayed goods. Glass jars with crystallized candies, folded colorful fabrics, cast iron pans, rosaries and prayer cards. There was something comforting in the simplicity of that place, so different from the elegant shops in Charleston, where the nuns occasionally took her. The bell above the door jingled, indicating a new entry. Evelyn looked distractedly, and her heart jumped violently when she recognized who was entering. Robert Miller stopped on the threshold, eyes adjusting to the dimness of the interior. He wore clean but worn work clothes, a leather hat in hand, the tranquil expression of someone coming to fulfill a routine task. Then he saw Evelyn, and something changed in his face, surprise followed by something warmer that he quickly controlled. "Miss Montgomery," he greeted with a slight nod, formal and respectful. "Mr. Miller," she replied, and hated how her voice came out higher-pitched than normal. Mr. Tobias interrupted his conversation with Mrs. Higgins to greet Robert, who asked for sacks of corn and barbed wire. While the merchant fetched the goods from the back storage, a strange silence hung in the store. Evelyn knew she should stay quiet, keep an appropriate distance, feign polite indifference. But curiosity was stronger. "How are your brothers?" she asked. And Mrs. Higgins looked at her with thinly veiled surprise. Robert seemed equally surprised by the question, but answered with gentleness. "They are well, thank you. The middle two are helping with the planting. The youngest is still too small for heavy work." "And your father?" "Working too much, as always," said Robert, and there was affection and concern mixed in his voice. "I tried to convince him to rest more, but he is stubborn." Evelyn smiled involuntarily. "Seems to be a common trait in fathers." His eyes sparkled with shared humor. "Must be." Mr. Tobias returned, carrying a sack of corn on his shoulders, breaking the moment. Robert helped carry the goods to the wagon waiting outside. Evelyn watched through the dusty window as he worked, the efficient movements of someone accustomed to physical effort. Muscles in his arms tensed under the fabric of his shirt, sweat shining on the forehead he wiped with the back of his hand. When he returned to fetch the last coil of wire, he passed close to Evelyn and murmured low enough that Mrs. Higgins couldn't hear. "The church library stays open on Thursday afternoons. It is usually empty." Then he left, paid Mr. Tobias, mounted his wagon, and departed without looking back. Evelyn stood there with her heart hammering so loud she was sure everyone could hear. Was it an invitation? A suggestion of where they could meet without raising suspicion? Or just a casual comment? Mrs. Higgins finished the shopping, and they loaded the packages into the buggy. But before leaving, the cook announced she needed to visit a friend who lived 2 streets behind the church, a quick matter between women that wouldn't take more than half an hour. Evelyn nodded, trying to appear disinterested. "Go ahead, Mrs. Higgins. I'll wait here." The cook hesitated. "Your father doesn't like you being alone." "I won't be alone. I'll stay in the square in front of the church," argued Evelyn. "It's the most public place possible." Mrs. Higgins bit her lip, but ended up agreeing. "Only half an hour," she promised. Evelyn watched the woman disappear around the corner, counted to 100 to ensure she was far away, and then crossed the square toward the church. St. Sebastian's Church was a modest building with whitewashed walls and a slate roof, but beautiful in its simplicity. Evelyn pushed the side door that led to the annex where the parish library operated, a small room donated by a devout farmer years ago. The room was empty, as Robert had said. Dark wood shelves lined the walls, holding books donated over the years, a mixture of religious works, American and British classics, and some translated foreign volumes. It smelled of old paper and beeswax. Robert was there, standing by the window overlooking the churchyard, thumbing through a leather-bound volume. He turned when he heard her footsteps. "You came," he said, and it wasn't a question. There was something like relief in his voice. "I came," confirmed Evelyn. "Shouldn't I have?" Robert closed the book slowly, placed it on the shelf. "Probably not," he admitted with brutal honesty. "But I am happy you did." Evelyn's heart accelerated again. "Why did you tell me about the library?" He hesitated, ran a hand through his hair in a gesture denoting rare nervousness. "Because I can't stop thinking about the conversation we had," he confessed. "Because in my whole life I've never met someone who read Henry James and understood it the way you did. Because I felt that perhaps you were thinking too." The air between them seemed to vibrate with a tension that wasn't uncomfortable, but charged with dangerous possibilities. "I was thinking," admitted Evelyn, her voice low, almost a whisper. "I couldn't stop." "This is reckless," said Robert, but he didn't move to leave. "You are Colonel Montgomery's daughter. I am the son of a small farmer who can barely keep the property running. Our worlds do not mix." "Should they?" asked Evelyn, and the boldness of her own question surprised her. Robert looked at her for a long moment, and there was clear conflict in his dark eyes. "In a fair world, yes," he finally replied. but we do not live in a fair world." "Then what do we do?" she insisted. "We should say goodbye here and never speak again," he said. "It is sensible, correct, what society expects." "But," urged Evelyn, because she heard the implicit but in his voice. "Oh, but I don't want to," confessed Robert. "And I know that makes me selfish and reckless and possibly an idiot, but I cannot lie about it." Evelyn felt something expand in her chest, a mixture of fear and excitement that made her tremble. "I don't want to either," she whispered. They stood there, standing on opposite sides of the small room, looking at each other as if crossing the abyss that separated their worlds. Then Robert took a step forward, and then another, until he was close enough for her to feel his warmth. If you are enjoying this story, leave a like and share with someone who needs to believe in love that defies convention. "We cannot do anything reckless," he said with a rough voice. "Your reputation, your future, everything depends on you remaining impeccable." "I know," agreed Evelyn. "But we can talk," continued Robert, "here, in this library, where it is public but discreet. Thursday is the day I come to town for supplies. You could come too," she completed. "Yes, I can." "This is still reckless," he warned. "I know," repeated Evelyn, "but some recklessness is worth the risk." And so it began, on that Thursday, in May of 1889, in the dusty library of a forgotten town church. It began with conversations that lasted 20 minutes, half an hour if they were lucky. Conversations about books, about ideas, about dreams and fears and everything that inhabited the space in between. Robert brought volumes he thought she would like, poetry by Walt Whitman, prose by Hawthorne. Evelyn shared impressions of French authors she had read at school, Victor Hugo and Alexandre Dumas. They discussed politics, the instability of the economy, rumors that the old ways wouldn't last much longer. They spoke about education, about the injustice of a system where poor children never learned to read while the wealthy squandered opportunities. And between books and ideas, they shared pieces of themselves. Robert spoke about the mother who died, about how he held his baby brother in his arms and promised to always care for him. About the decision to abandon his career in the city to return home, a decision he didn't regret, but that weighed on him sometimes when he thought of everything that could have been. Evelyn spoke about the mother she lost, about how her father became a stranger afterward, about years of loneliness in a school where she was educated but never loved, about the fear of a future that felt like a gilded cage from which she would never escape. The weeks passed too quickly. May turned to June, and Evelyn's birthday approached like a storm on the horizon. The colonel intensified preparations for the ball, hired musicians from Atlanta, ordered a complete renovation of the main hall, had a new dress made for his daughter by an expensive seamstress in Savannah, and he began to introduce the suitors. The first was Anthony Sterling, son of a cotton farmer from the next valley. He was 28, reasonably handsome, educated in England, heir to a considerable fortune. The colonel invited him to dinner on a Tuesday, and Evelyn had to sit at the table and feign interest while the young man spoke about cotton production, tariff politics, and railroad investments. Anthony was polite, even pleasant. But there was a void in his eyes when he looked at her, an interest that was commercial, not emotional. He asked if she played the piano, and when she said yes, requested a demonstration. Evelyn played Chopin, pouring her soul into the music, and he applauded politely and commented that it would be good entertainment for future receptions. The second suitor appeared 5 days later. Marshall Hawthorne, the eldest son of a colonel who controlled 3 plantations in southern Georgia. 32 years old, a recent widower with no children, looking for a new wife. He was too serious, too formal, treating Evelyn with a cold courtesy that made her feel like an object on display. During tea on the veranda, he explained his expectations should she accept the marriage. He expected a wife who managed the household efficiently, who gave him heirs, who represented the family adequately at social events. He spoke for 40 minutes without asking anything about her, about what she wanted, about who she was beyond her surname. When he left, the colonel asked for Evelyn's opinion. She replied honestly that she found him cold. Her father snorted impatiently, saying that marriage wasn't about warm feelings, but about practical compatibility. Then came the third suitor, and everything changed. Julian Vance arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, June 4th, 4 days before Evelyn's birthday. He arrived in a black carriage pulled by 4 white horses, wearing an English suit of perfect cut, bringing imported flowers and a charm that seemed rehearsed but was effective. He was 26, with blonde hair rare for a southerner, light blue eyes, delicate, almost feminine features. He was the only son of Senator Vance, owner of a cotton empire that stretched across 7 counties. He had studied in France, spoke 4 languages, played the violin, quoted poets with ease. And the colonel adored him instantly. Evelyn saw it happen during the elaborate dinner Mrs. Higgins had prepared days in advance. She saw her father laugh at Julian's jokes, saw him approve with nods the comments on business, saw a calculating gleam in his eyes when the young man casually mentioned he would inherit everything when the senator died. Julian, for his part, was impeccable. He praised the house, the food, and especially Evelyn. He said she was more beautiful than described, that her talent at the piano was extraordinary when she played after dinner, that it would be an honor to have such a refined wife. But there was something in his eyes when he looked at her that Evelyn couldn't decipher, something too calculated, too performative. He said all the right words, but they rang empty like well-rehearsed theatre. When Julian left, promising to return for the ball, the colonel called Evelyn to his study. He sat behind his massive desk, lit a cigar, and declared with satisfaction that he had found the perfect husband for her. "Father, I barely know him," protested Evelyn. "You will know him better in time," dismissed the colonel. "The important thing is that he comes from an excellent family, has his own fortune, was educated in Europe. It is everything you could wish for." Evelyn took a deep breath, gathering courage. "And if I do not want to marry him?" Her father's expression hardened. "It is not a question of want, Evelyn. It is a question of duty, and more than that." He paused, taking a long drag from the cigar. "Our financial situation is not as solid as it appears. I made some bad investments. Some harvests were below expectation. I need an alliance with a powerful family to regain lost ground." Evelyn's stomach churned. "Are you saying you need to sell me to save the business?" "Oh, I am saying you have an obligation to this family," he corrected with a frosty voice. "I gave you an expensive education, a home, food, clothes. Now is the time to repay by making an advantageous marriage. And if I refuse?" His eyes narrowed dangerously. "Then you will stay here, a spinster dependent on my charity until I die. And after that, you will be left with nothing, because everything I have will go to cousins or the government. You choose, Evelyn, a comfortable life as the wife of a rich man, or a miserable life as an abandoned woman without resources." It was an ultimatum, not a conversation. Evelyn left the office with trembling legs and went straight to her room. She lay on the bed, still dressed, and let the tears come, silent and bitter. For the first time, she fully understood the trap she was in. She had no money of her own, no profession, nowhere to go. Her father controlled everything, and he would use that control to force her into the marriage he wanted. The only thing keeping her sane was knowing that the following Thursday, if she could get to town, she would see Robert. She could talk to someone who saw her as a person, not merchandise, someone who understood the weight of family responsibilities but still believed in choices made for love. Thursday arrived June 6th, 2 days before the ball. Evelyn woke with a knot of anxiety in her stomach. The colonel was especially vigilant lately, suspicious of how frequently she went to town. But Mrs. Higgins, who noticed more than she let on, created the perfect excuse. They needed to fetch the final shipment of ingredients for the ball's sweets, and the seamstress needed to make a final adjustment to Evelyn's dress. Her father allowed it, but ordered Silas to accompany them this time. The foreman, a serious man in his 40s, mounted a horse and followed the buggy at a respectful distance. In town, Mrs. Higgins went to the general store, Evelyn went to the seamstress. The adjustment to the dress took 20 minutes, time that felt like an eternity. When she left, she saw Silas chatting with the blacksmith 3 doors down, distracted discussing the price of horseshoes. Evelyn crossed the square quickly, entered the church, slipped into the library room. Robert was there, as he always was on Thursdays, but this time he wasn't reading. He was standing by the window, tense as a violin string about to snap. "Evelyn," he said when he saw her, voice heavy with urgency. "We need to talk." His tone frightened her. What happened? He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration she had learned to recognize. "I went to the tavern yesterday to fetch my father who was drinking with friends," he began. "I heard a conversation between farmers about your birthday ball, about how your father has already chosen your husband." Evelyn closed her eyes, a sharp pain crossing her chest. "It's true," she admitted. "Julian Vance, the senator's son." The silence that followed was heavy as lead. "Are you going to accept?" asked Robert finally, voice so low she barely heard. "I don't know," replied Evelyn with honesty that hurt. "My father made it clear I have no real choice. If I refuse, I will be left with nothing. He is in financial difficulties, needs this marriage to recover." Robert turned to face her fully, and there was raw emotion in his eyes he no longer tried to hide. "And what do you want, Evelyn? Forget your father, forget society, forget everything. What does your heart want?" The words tumbled out before she could censor them. "I want you." His breath hitched, his whole body tensing. "You cannot want me," he said, but without conviction. "I have nothing to offer. A small farm that barely supports my family. Hard work with no guarantee of a future, no title, no fortune, nothing that matters to your world." "You have everything that matters to me," corrected Evelyn, and realized it was absolute truth. "You have kindness, intelligence, integrity. You treat me as an equal, not a possession. You make me feel alive instead of just existing." Robert crossed the distance between them in 2 long strides, stopping so close she felt his heat. "Evelyn, if there were any way for us to be together, I would fight for it," he said, with an intensity that made her tremble. "But there isn't. Your father would never accept it. Society would never accept it. We would be destroyed, both of us." "Then what do we do?" she asked, echoing the same question from weeks ago. "I don't know," admitted Robert. "I only know that the idea of you marrying another man is killing me inside." "Me too," whispered Evelyn. They stood there, so close that a minimal movement would be enough to touch, but keeping distance because they knew if they crossed that line, there would be no turning back. It was Robert who stepped back first, breathing deep as if he needed air. "You need to go," he said, "before they notice your absence." Evelyn nodded but didn't move. "The ball is the day after tomorrow," she said. "My father is going to announce something, I'm sure." "Then perhaps this is our last conversation," replied Robert, pain evident in every word. "Don't say that," she implored. But they both knew it was true. Time was running out, choices narrowing, the world pressing to separate them. Evelyn forced herself to walk to the door, but stopped with her hand on the frame. "Robert?" He looked at her, waiting. "Thank you," she said, voice choked, "for these weeks, for making me feel that something else was possible." His expression shattered. "Evelyn, don't—" But she had already left, crossing the church in a hurry, traversing the square with tears burning in eyes she refused to let fall. She found Silas still talking to the blacksmith, Mrs. Higgins leaving the store laden with packages. The ride back to the plantation was silent. Mrs. Higgins looked at her several times, concern clear on her wrinkled face, but didn't ask. Evelyn was grateful for the discretion because she didn't trust her own voice to answer without falling apart. The night of the ball arrived. Wrapped in anxiety, Evelyn felt on her skin like clothes too tight. She spent the day being prepped like a doll for exhibition. A long bath with scented oils, hair washed and styled in elaborate curls, held with pearl combs, a sky-blue silk dress with French lace and hand embroidery that must have cost a fortune. Betsy helped her with infinite patience, tightening the corset, adjusting the voluminous skirt, fastening the sapphire necklace that had belonged to her mother. "You look beautiful, miss," the girl said with sincerity. Evelyn looked in the large bedroom mirror and saw a stranger looking back. Beautiful, yes, but empty as a shell without a soul inside. Guests began to arrive at dusk, entire families coming from plantations miles away, from neighboring towns, some even from Savannah. The house glowed with hundreds of candles, smelled of fresh flowers decorating every room, echoed with music from a string quartet the colonel had brought from the city. Evelyn descended the grand staircase to the main hall, transformed into a ballroom, and everyone turned to look. Polite applause echoed. The colonel, imposing in a gala military uniform full of medals, offered his arm to her with something that almost looked like pride. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw only the satisfaction of a merchant about to close a lucrative deal. The night dragged on in a torturous succession of dances, introductions, empty conversations. Evelyn danced with Anthony Sterling, who stepped on her foot twice. She danced with Marshall Hawthorne, who danced like a soldier marching. And she danced 3 times with Julian Vance, who danced perfectly and whispered sugary compliments that made her want to flee. During the 3rd dance with Julian, he held her closer than was appropriate and murmured in her ear, "Your father and mine have already discussed our future," he said with a smooth voice. "I believe an announcement will be made yet tonight." Panic froze Evelyn's blood. "Announcement," she repeated. "Of our engagement," clarified Julian, smiling as if he were giving a wonderful gift. "I am certain you will be very happy with me, Evelyn. I will give you everything you deserve." The music ended, and he led her back to where the colonel waited. The 2 men exchanged a significant look, and Evelyn knew it was happening, that it was about to happen, that she couldn't stop it. The colonel clapped his hands, asking for attention. The music stopped. Conversation ceased. Everyone turned to him. Friends, family, distinguished guests, he began with a voice that echoed powerfully through the room. "Today we celebrate not only my dear daughter Evelyn's birthday, but also an announcement that fills me with joy and pride." No, thought Evelyn, the world spinning nauseatingly around her. Please, no. "I have the honor of announcing the engagement of Evelyn to Julian Vance, son of Senator Vance. A union that joins 2 great families and promises a prosperous future for both." Applause exploded. People came to greet, hug, congratulate. Julian held Evelyn's hand, kissed her fingers, a victorious smile on his lips, and Evelyn felt something break inside her, definitive and irreparable, like glass shattering into 1,000 pieces that could never be glued back together. The ballroom continued in celebration, but Evelyn heard nothing more. The sound of applause, congratulations, the music restarting, it all transformed into a distant, muffled hum, as if she was submerged in deep water. Julian held her hand with possessive firmness, introducing her as his fiancée to people she barely knew, and his smile was pure, calculated triumph. The colonel observed everything with a satisfaction he didn't try to disguise, accepting compliments from farmers, coming to shake his hand, and comment on the excellent alliance he had just sealed. Evelyn caught fragments of conversations, loose words hitting her like stones. Advantageous marriage, perfect union, the senator will be pleased, business will prosper. No one asked what she felt, no one cared. Evelyn forced herself to smile, to thank the well-wishers, to play the role expected of her. But inside she was falling apart, every breath hurting as if ground glass were lodged in her lungs. She thought of Robert, of how he would receive the news, how he likely already knew because gossip flew fast in the small towns of the countryside. The party stretched into the early morning. Evelyn danced until her feet ached inside the silk shoes, smiled until her jaw locked, conversed until her voice grew hoarse. And when the last guests finally departed and she could go up to her room, she crumbled. Betsy helped her remove the elaborate dress, undid the curls, loosened the corset that had left red marks on her skin. The girl worked in silence, but Evelyn saw pity in her eyes. Everyone on the plantation knew, she realized. Everyone saw that this engagement was a commercial transaction, not a union of love. When she was finally alone, wearing only a simple white nightgown, Evelyn went to the window and opened the curtains. The night outside was clear, a full moon illuminating the fields and the distant woods with ghostly silver. An owl hooted in the grove. The wind brought the scent of jasmine from the bushes planted by her mother years ago. She rested her forehead against the cold glass and let the tears fall finally, silent and hot, running down her cheeks and dripping onto the wooden sill. She wept for the freedom she never had, for the love she could never live, for the future that had just been decided without her permission. But beneath the pain, something else began to grow. Anger. Not explosive, fleeting anger, but cold and determined, burning slowly like an ember that never goes out. Anger at the father, who saw her as a chess piece. Anger at Julian, who wanted her as a trophy. Anger at a society that imprisoned women in gilded cages and called it protection. And from this anger was born a decision not yet fully formed, but present, like a seed planted in fertile soil. She would not do this. She would not marry a man she didn't love to save her father's business. She would not waste her entire life in an empty marriage. It didn't matter the price. It didn't matter the scandal. It didn't matter the consequences. There had to be a way to escape. There had to be. Evelyn slept little that night, and the sleep that came was agitated by nightmares where she walked down an endless corridor with walls closing in tighter and tighter. She woke with the sun already high, mouth dry and head heavy. She got up, washed her face, dressed in simple cotton clothes. When she went down for breakfast, she found a letter waiting for her on the dining room sideboard. She recognized the expensive paper, the wax seal with the Vance family crest. She opened it with fingers that trembled slightly. The letter was from Julian, written in perfect calligraphy, full of flowery words about how happy he was with the engagement, about plans he had for their future, about how he would love and care for her always. It ended by saying he would return the following week to discuss marriage details with the colonel, and that he hoped she would begin preparing a suitable trousseau. Evelyn crumpled the letter in her hand, a sudden urge to tear it to pieces almost irresistible, but she controlled herself, smoothed the paper again, put it in her dress pocket. The colonel appeared for breakfast in an excellent mood, a rare thing. He greeted his daughter with a kiss on the forehead and a comment on how the ball had been an absolute success. "Everyone is commenting on what a handsome couple you and Julian make," he said, while serving himself coffee. "The senator sent me a message this morning confirming his satisfaction with the union." Evelyn pushed the bread and jam around her plate, unable to eat. "Father, we need to talk about this." "About what?" he asked distractedly, leafing through a newspaper from days ago that had finally arrived from Savannah. "About the engagement," clarified Evelyn. "About the fact that you announced it publicly. without consulting me, without giving me a choice. The colonel lowered the newspaper, looking at her with impatience. We have already discussed this, Evelyn. You are 22 years old, an age more than adequate to marry. Julian is an excellent suitor. There is nothing more to discuss. And if I do not want to marry him? Her father's expression hardened. I have already made it clear that it is not a question of want. It is a question of duty, of responsibility to the family. Responsibility that you created by making bad investments, pointed out Evelyn, courage rising from an unknown source. It shouldn't be my obligation to fix your mistakes. The colonel slammed his cup onto the saucer with force that almost broke it. Watch what you say, girl. Everything you have, every dress, every meal, every book you read, I paid for. You owe everything to me. One owes love to a daughter, not payment for basic expenses, she retorted, voice trembling but firm. Mother wouldn't have approved of this. Mentioning her mother was a mistake. The colonel's face turned red with anger. Do not dare speak of your mother. She would understand perfectly what I am doing, ensuring a secure future for you. Ooh, would she understand that you are selling me like cattle at an auction? Challenged Evelyn. The slap came fast, cracking loudly in the silence of the room. Evelyn brought a hand to her stinging cheek, shock robbing her of words. The colonel stood up, his whole body rigid with contained fury. You are engaged to Julian Vance, and you will marry him before the end of the year, he declared with a frosty voice. That is the last word on the subject. If you try to disobey me, if you try to cause a scandal, I guarantee you will regret it for the rest of your life. He left the room with heavy steps, leaving Evelyn alone with a burning cheek and tears of rage and humiliation streaming down. Mrs. Higgins appeared minutes later, bringing a cloth soaked in cold water. She applied it gently to Evelyn's face, making comforting sounds like when she was a child. "My girl," she whispered, voice heavy with impotent compassion. "I can't do this, Mrs. Higgins," said Evelyn, voice broken. "I can't marry him. I will die inside if I marry." The cook sighed deeply, conflict clear in her eyes. "What can you do, child? A woman alone without money, without a profession? The world out there is cruel to young ladies in your situation." "There must be a way out," insisted Evelyn. "There must be." But in that moment, she couldn't see what it was. The following days were a fog of mandatory preparations and tense silences. The colonel barely spoke to her, except to give orders about the marriage. A seamstress was called to start the wedding dress. The local parson came to discuss the ceremony. Letters arrived from the Vance family with guest lists, date suggestions, specific demands. Evelyn went through the motions like an automaton, present physically but absent in spirit. She hadn't returned to town, hadn't seen Robert since before the ball. She knew trying to go now would be impossible. The colonel was too vigilant, too suspicious. But then, on a Thursday morning, 10 days after the ball, Betsy brought a letter along with Evelyn's breakfast. It had no external identification, just folded paper sealed with common wax. Evelyn waited for the girl to leave to open it. The handwriting was masculine, firm, but hurried. "Evelyn, I need to see you one last time. I understand your engagement makes our meetings impossible, but there is something I discovered that you need to know before making irreversible decisions. I will be at the church library this afternoon from 2 to 3. If you can come, please come. If you cannot, I will understand and never bother you again. Robert." Evelyn's heart raced. Something she needed to know. About Julian. About the marriage. Her mind raced with possibilities. But how to leave the plantation? The colonel was home, working in his study. Silas had been instructed not to let her leave alone. It was Mrs. Higgins who provided the solution, appearing in Evelyn's room near noon with a plan. "I'm going to tell the colonel you have terrible feminine cramps and need to stay in bed," she explained. "Betsy will stay here in the room making noise as if she's tending to you. You go down the back stairs, take the old horse from the stable no one uses, go by the woods trail that leads to town, from the opposite side. 1 hour, no more." "Why are you doing this?" asked Evelyn, gratitude tightening her throat. The cook's eyes grew watery. "Because your mother was my friend, and she made me promise to look after you. And looking after isn't just feeding the body, it's also protecting the soul. If you don't go, you'll spend your whole life wondering what that young man wanted to say. Go, find out, come back fast." Evelyn hugged the woman tightly, then changed quickly into riding clothes, plaited her hair in a simple braid, and went down the back stairs while Betsy began an elaborate performance of caring for a sick mistress. The horse was an old grey mare, gentle and reliable. Evelyn mounted, followed the narrow trail cutting through the woods on the least watched side of the property. She knew that path from childhood when she explored every corner of the plantation. She reached town in 40 minutes, tied the mare behind the church where she wouldn't be easily seen, and entered through the side door. The library was empty except for Robert, who waited by the window. He turned when he heard her steps, visible relief flooding his face. "You came," he said, exactly as he had said weeks ago. "I came," she confirmed. "What did you discover?" Robert hesitated, ran a hand through his hair. "I didn't want to be the one to tell you this," he began, "but it would be worse to let you find out too late." "Tell me what?" insisted Evelyn, anxiety growing. He took a deep breath. "I have a friend in Savannah, a teacher like me, who keeps in regular contact with me by letter. I mentioned in a recent letter about your engagement to Julian Vance. He replied this week with information that left me disturbed." "What information?" Robert took a letter from his pocket, offered it to her. "Julian maintains a mistress in the city, a married woman, the wife of a wealthy merchant. The affair is known in social circles there, though discreet enough not to cause a public scandal. My friend writes that Julian has no intention of ending the relationship after the marriage." Evelyn took the letter, read the carefully written words, detailing how the senator's son was viewed in Savannah society. Charming, seductive, a womanizer who collected conquests like trophies. The marriage to her was seen as a necessary transaction to secure legitimate heirs and political alliances, but it wouldn't change his behavior. Her hands shook, holding the paper. A part of her felt validation, confirmation that her instincts about Julian were correct. But another part felt growing nausea, imagining a future as a betrayed wife, trapped in a marriage where she would be merely a decorative piece while her husband maintained a secret life. If this story is touching your heart, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, and share with those you love. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked, voice hoarse. "Because you deserve to know the truth before signing a contract that will change your life forever," replied Robert. "Because even if we cannot be together, I cannot bear the idea of you marrying a man who will not value you as he should." "And what should I do with this information?" "That is your decision," he said. "You can confront your father, you can confront Julian, you can use it as ammunition to break the engagement. Or you can decide it doesn't matter, that marriage is just a practical arrangement anyway." "It matters," said Evelyn, with an intensity that surprised her. "It matters because if I am going to be forced to marry, at least I want it to be with someone honest. Julian is a liar who is using me." "Then use this truth," encouraged Robert. "Confront them. Demand explanations." Evelyn looked at him, memorizing every detail of his face, because some part of her knew this might be the last time. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. For the conversations, for the company, for showing me that good men exist in the world." "Evelyn," began Robert, voice choked. "No," she interrupted gently. "Don't make it harder. You have a life here, a family that depends on you. I have a battle to fight. And maybe I won't even win. But at least I will fight. "If you need anything, anything at all," he said intensely, "my father has the neighboring farm. There will always be a safe place for you there if you need to run." Evelyn nodded, trusting not her voice to answer. She put the letter in her dress pocket, turned and left before her courage failed. The ride back to the plantation was a blur. She rode on automatic, following the trail without really seeing the landscape. Her mind buzzed with half-formed plans, with growing anger, with determination hardening like forged iron. She arrived home, returned the mare to the stable, went up the back way. Betsy helped her change clothes, undid the braid, fixed her hair. Mrs. Higgins appeared with chamomile tea and news that the colonel had asked for her and was informed she was resting. Evelyn thanked her, drank the tea, waited for nightfall. During dinner, she was silent but observant. She studied her father, trying to see beyond the facade of authority to the man beneath. She saw tiredness in the lines around his eyes, worry in the way he pushed food around his plate without much appetite, tension in shoulders that never completely relaxed. He was afraid, she realized, afraid of losing everything he had built, afraid of financial ruin, afraid of appearing weak before society. And he was using her, his only daughter, as a lifeline. The anger could have been greater, but instead Evelyn felt something more complicated, pity mixed with sadness. He didn't understand that he was destroying the only family he had left in pursuit of preserving status and money. "Father," she said when the silence became too heavy, "I need to ask something about Julian." The colonel raised his eyes, cautious. "What do you want to know?" "Did you investigate his character?" she asked directly. "Beyond the fortune and family connections?" "Of course I investigated," he replied impatiently. "He comes from a respectable family, studied in Europe, has an impeccable reputation." "Impeccable," repeated Evelyn, and took Robert's letter from her pocket. "Then why do I have a letter from a reliable witness saying he maintains a mistress in the city and intends to continue the relationship after our marriage?" The silence that fell was absolute. The colonel turned pale, then red, then pale again. "Where did you get that?" he demanded. "That matters less than whether it is true," retorted Evelyn. "Is it true, father?" He averted his gaze, and that hesitation was answer enough. "You knew," said Evelyn, voice low, vibrating with betrayal. "You knew and didn't tell me." "Men have certain liberties," began the colonel uncomfortably. "It does not mean he won't be a good husband." Evelyn stood up so abruptly her chair almost tipped over. "Good husband," she repeated, voice rising. "He is a liar who views me as a convenience, not a person, and you knew and were going to hand me over to him anyway." "The marriage is still advantageous," insisted the colonel, but there was less conviction now. "His fortune, the connections—" "I don't care about his fortune," cut in Evelyn. "I am not going to marry him." "You have no choice." "There is always a choice," she said, and this time it was a declaration, not an argument. "I can refuse publicly. I can create a scandal so great the senator will break the agreement to protect his own name. I can tell everyone about the mistress." The colonel stood up too, slamming his hands on the table. "If you do that, you will be ruined. No decent man will accept you. You will live as a pariah." "Then I will live as a pariah," replied Evelyn, a calm she felt being strangely liberating. "Better that than living as a betrayed woman trapped in a rotten marriage." "You are mad," said her father, but there was desperation beginning to crack his authority. "No, father, for the first time in my life, I am sane." She left the dining room, went up to her room, locked the door. She heard her father shouting below, demanding she return, but ignored him. She sat on the bed, hands trembling with adrenaline. She had done it. She had defied the colonel openly. Now she needed to follow through to the end. She spent the night awake planning. By dawn, her decision was made. Julian would arrive the following afternoon for dinner and discussion of marriage details. It would be the perfect moment. Evelyn spent the day in meticulous preparation. She asked Betsy to pack the few jewels she had, which were hers and not the family's. She separated simple clothes she could carry in a small bundle. She wrote a long letter to Mrs. Higgins explaining everything, thanking her for years of care, asking forgiveness for the scandal she would cause. When Julian arrived at dusk, coming in his elegant carriage bringing expensive flowers for his fiancée, Evelyn was ready. Dinner was elaborate, served in the dining room with fine linen cloth and polished silver. The Colonel, Julian, and Evelyn sat, conversing about dates, about how many guests, about where the honeymoon would be. Evelyn let the conversation flow until dessert. Then she put down her spoon, wiped her mouth on the napkin, and said with crystal clarity, "There will be no wedding." Julian stopped mid-motion, looking at her as if he hadn't understood. "Pardon?" "I am not going to marry you," repeated Evelyn. "I am breaking our engagement." The silence was thick as molasses. "Evelyn, this is not funny," said the Colonel with a dangerously low voice. "I do not intend to be funny," she replied. "I intend to be clear. I discovered that Julian maintains a mistress in Savannah and intends to continue the relationship after our marriage. I will not marry a liar." Color drained from Julian's face. "Where did you hear this ridiculous slander?" he asked, but his voice trembled at the edges. "It isn't slander if it is true," said Evelyn, taking the letter from her pocket and placing it on the table. "I have written testimony. Do you wish to deny it?" Julian looked at the letter, at the Colonel, back to Evelyn. The charm evaporated, revealing the cold calculator beneath. "Every sensible wife pretends not to see certain things," he said with disdain. "I expected more maturity from you. And I expected more honesty from someone who swears eternal love," retorted Evelyn. "But it seems we have both disappointed each other." Julian stood up abruptly. "I do not need to accept insults in a house that should be my future family's," he declared, looking at the Colonel. "Control your daughter, or this engagement is finished." The Colonel looked between the two, conflict visible on his face. Evelyn held her breath, waiting, and then her father made the choice. "Evelyn, apologize," he ordered. Something inside her shattered with painful finality. "No," she said simply. "Apologize now or you are disowned," threatened the Colonel. "Then disown me," replied Evelyn, standing up too. "I won't trade dignity for inheritance." Julian snorted in disbelief. "You are making a terrible mistake," he said. "When you realize, when you are alone with nothing, you will beg to go back. But it will be too late." "I won't go back," guaranteed Evelyn. "I prefer having nothing to having everything built on lies." He looked at her with pure contempt, turned to the Colonel. "I regret we wasted time on this," he said. "When she recovers her senses, if she recovers, you can contact me. But I won't wait long." He left, stomping his feet, and moments later they heard the carriage departing. The Colonel and Evelyn stood alone in the dining room, amidst remains of a meal no one had finished. "You destroyed everything," said her father, voice dead. "I destroyed a rotten marriage before it destroyed my life," corrected Evelyn. He shook his head, appearing to age 10 years in seconds. "Get out of my house," he said. "I can no longer look at you." Evelyn nodded, strangely calm. "I have already packed my things. I will leave in the morning." She went up to her room, where the small bundle waited. She lay down, fully dressed, waiting for dawn. When the sun rose, painting the sky pink and gold, she went down the stairs for the last time. Mrs. Higgins waited in the kitchen, eyes red from crying. She hugged Evelyn with force that almost crushed, whispering blessings and prayers. "Go to the miller's farm," she advised. "That young man, Robert, he will help." Evelyn nodded, hugged the cook again, and left through the back. She walked the familiar trail, crossed the creek where it all began, reached the boundary between properties. The Miller house was a simple structure, smaller than the Colonel's stable, but well cared for, with a flower garden and a lush vegetable patch. She knocked on the door with a trembling hand. Robert opened it, and the surprise on his face transformed into concern when he saw the bundle she carried. "Evelyn," he said. "I broke the engagement," she explained, voice firm despite the fear. "My father threw me out. You said there was a safe place here if I needed it." Robert didn't hesitate. He pulled her inside, called his father. Joseph Miller was a man in his 50s, grey hair, face marked by sun and work, but kind eyes. He heard Evelyn's story, exchanged a look with Robert and nodded. "You can stay here as long as you need," he said. "We have little, but we share it with pleasure." And so Evelyn began a new life. She shared a small room with Robert's 13-year-old sister. She learned to cook on a wood stove, to wash clothes in the basin, to plant and harvest in the garden. Her delicate hands developed calluses. Fair skin gained a touch of bronze from the sun. A body accustomed to idleness learned the rhythm of work. But there was peace in it, peace in honest work, in a family that accepted her without judgment, in a life simple but real. Robert was careful, respectful, kept an appropriate distance. But they worked side by side, talked in the afternoons when they rested under the trees, shared books in the evenings by lamplight. The months passed. Evelyn heard news of her father's plantation through town gossip. The Colonel refused all visitors, locked himself in his study, business worsening without the alliance with the senator. Then came December, and with it, disaster. Mrs. Higgins appeared at the Miller farm on a rainy morning. Soaked and desperate, the Colonel had collapsed, she explained, weeping. Accumulated debts, creditors threatening to take everything, health deteriorated by stress. He was very sick, delirious with fever, calling for his daughter. Evelyn went without hesitation. The plantation she left months ago was changed. An air of abandonment hung over everything. Gardens uncared for, walls needing paint. Silence where before there was life. The Colonel lay in bed, skin jaundiced, breathing labored. He opened his eyes when she entered, and tears ran down. "Evelyn," he murmured, "forgive me." She sat on the edge of the bed, held his trembling hand. "I am here, Father." He wept then, tears of a broken man who lost everything chasing the wrong things. "I was a fool," he said. "I chose money over you. I chose pride over love, and now I lost both." "You haven't lost," said Evelyn gently. "I am here." The doctor came, declared the Colonel would recover if he rested, and stopped worrying about business. But the plantation was truly lost, debts too large to pay. It was Robert who suggested the solution. Her father sold part of the land, paid the debts, kept a smaller portion, but enough to live modestly. And perhaps, if the Colonel accepted, he could live with them, unite the families not by arranged marriage, but by genuine choice. The Colonel, humbled but without options, accepted. Evelyn and Robert married in a simple ceremony at the town church in March of 1890, just as the new decade promised to change the South forever. There was no elaborate ball, imported musicians, hundreds of guests, just family, close friends, genuine love. The Colonel, recovered but transformed, walked with his daughter to the altar. He handed her hand to Robert with tears in his eyes and a hoarse whisper, "Take care of her better than I did." And Robert promised he would. They lived on the Miller farm, expanded with land bought from the Colonel's property. Robert opened a small school for poor children in the region, fulfilling an ancient dream. Evelyn taught piano and French, discovering purpose in educating that she never found in an idle life. The Colonel, living with them, learned to work the land with his own hands, learned the names of the workers, helped with the harvest, played with future grandchildren when they were born. He transformed into the loving grandfather that a life of power never permitted him to be as a father. And in the afternoons, when the sun gilded the fields and the wind brought the scent of ripe crops, Evelyn sat on the veranda beside Robert, fingers intertwined, and knew with absolute certainty she had chosen right. She didn't have a fortune, title, mansion, but she had love, respect, a partnership of equals. She had work that mattered, a life with purpose, freedom to be herself. She had everything that really was worth the effort. The scandal of the broken engagement became a legend in the region. A story mothers told daughters about the courage to choose happiness over convenience. Julian married eventually the daughter of another rich farmer, and rumors confirmed he maintained the same mistress, a cycle of unhappiness perpetuated. But Evelyn was free of that. She was free of the gilded cage, of suffocating expectations, of the empty life that almost consumed her. And when she died old at 86, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, on the same simple farm she chose decades before, her last words were of gratitude. Gratitude for the courage to defy the impossible, for the fall in the creek that changed everything, for the love that was worth every sacrifice, for the life she lived instead of merely existing. And this story, told and retold through generations, carried a message that never aged, that true love is worth more than all the gold in the world, that the courage to choose one's own path is the greatest wealth one can possess, and that sometimes destroying the cage is the only way to learn to fly.